Good morning, everybody. We're live here from the birdhouse. We are in the first week of June. It is June 7th, and today we're talking about bats. There's different bats that you can find here in New York, and we're going to talk about not only the types of bats that you can see, the different species, but about their biology and how you can attract them to your yard. They are fantastic ways of means of controlling insects. So we'll talk about that today. As well as always, if you have any kind of questions, you can put those in the comments. Any kind of sightings that you'd like to report, you can put those in there as well, especially if you have bats. If you have any kind of bat related stories or questions or comments, sightings, if you've got them flying around in your neighborhood, let us know, because their populations are declining, unfortunately. So they're not as common as they used to be. So let's get started talking about bats. And a lot of this applies to not only bats of New York, but bats in general, especially when we talk about putting up houses. So bats, let's give you kind of just an overview on bats in general. Bats are nocturnal. There's more than 1,100 species worldwide. They're sometimes called flying mice, but they're not rodents at all. They are not in the rodent family by any means. In fact, they're more closely related to primates and people than they are rodents, surprisingly enough. They are a mammal, which means they have fur. They're warm-blooded. They give birth to live young. The females will produce milk, and they're the only mammal that can truly fly. So they're the only ones that can actually truly fly like a bird does. You might be familiar with animals like flying squirrels. Flying squirrels don't really fly, they actually glide. So they can't fly long distances like a bat can, but they can glide from treetop to treetop. Same with sugar gliders, that same kind of idea. So bats are the only mammal that can truly fly. As far as their morphology, or how their body is set up, they have wing membranes, thin wing membranes that are supported by bones, which allow them to maneuver and fly very precisely while in flight. And so for comparing our bone structure to that of a bat, the bones in our hand are going to be those same types of bones that have elongated over time on the wing membrane here of the bat. So those are like our finger bones. Those are the same bones that the bats have had over time, have evolved to be long and thin and support this membrane here, both their wing membrane, and then they also have a tail membrane here at the bottom of their body there. So this is the typical bat morphology here. Bats also have very specialized feet. So when they are at rest, the tendons in their feet are closed. So that's why they are able to hang upside down for long periods of time. They can be asleep, they can be hibernating, and because their tendons are held closed while at rest, they can hang upside down for hours, days, months at a time without expelling any kind of energy. So it takes energy to actually unfurl their feet, because at rest their tendons are tight and will be closed. So they can easily hang on to surfaces for very long periods of time. They can also tilt their heads very far back, so they can even look all the way behind them. So they're very nimble there as far as their feet and their bone structure in their necks. And here's some bats here hanging upside down. Bats in general tend to congregate together, but we'll talk about some that don't do that as well. There are such things as fruit bats, and fruit bats are these really large species. And so if you ever see pictures of these giant bats, these are going to be fruit bats that are going to be further down south. We're not going to have any of those here by any means in the upstate New York area. These are going to be more like a South American type of group of bats. And fruit bats are really important for pollination of plants, of fruit trees. Some species of plants that are very dependent on these fruit bats are mango, banana, agave, cocoa. So they do help pollinate, and they also help spread seeds because they will eat the fruit and then they will spread the seeds. And then they'll also pollinate as well from plants that have and produce nectar. So there's over 500 different plant species that depend on bats for pollination, and some of them are some of the fruits that we depend on and we enjoy quite often. What we have here in upstate New York and for most of the United States are going to be the insectivorous bats. So they eat mainly insects. So one bat can eat thousands of mosquitoes in an hour. So if you just think of your typical little brown bat, which is a common bat we have here in the area, just one little brown bat can eat around 1,000 insects every hour. So it's pretty impressive how much insect material they can eat. So, and as far as bats in New York, all of the bats that we have are insectivores. So they eat primarily insects. So some bats will also eat things like scorpions and tarantulas if you're going further down south. But most of the bats that we have in North America are insectivorous bats. So 70% of bats worldwide eat insects. So that's what most of them do. And then you've got the 30% that will eat fruit and drink nectar and that kind of thing. So this is what we are looking at here in our area, the insectivorous bats. Now, there are such things as vampire bats. There are true vampire bats. There are 3 species worldwide. They are native to Mexico and South America, but they feed on birds and cattle. So you don't have to worry about them sucking your blood. You don't have to worry about suddenly turning into a vampire if you've taken a trip to Mexico and gotten a bite from something. It's really not going to be from a bat. They will feed on cattle and birds as well. So they're known to do that overnight. They are known to feed primarily on cattle and livestock. So there is quite a diverse range of bats as far as sizes. The bumblebee bat is the smallest mammal in the world. It's only about 4 centimeters in length. So very, very tiny, very, very small, smallest mammal in the whole world. And then you've got the golden crowned flying fox, which is huge. This is going to be, of course, one of those fruit bats, one of those really giant bats. And they have a wingspan of 5 to 6 feet. So there's a huge diversity of bats as far as their size goes. Now, our insectivorous bats here will use echolocation, but even though they use echolocation, their eyesight is quite good. So you've heard the phrase probably blind as a bat. It's kind of a misnomer because they do actually have quite good eyesight, but they also have wonderful echolocation, and their echolocation is used for hunting in the dark. They can make very rapid pulses of sound, up to 200 pulses per second. So it's really, really quick pulses. Those sounds will bounce off an object and come back to the bat, and they can use that information to determine where their prey is, and they can identify the size, the location, the shape of the object using those really quick pulses that are going through the air. So sometimes you can hear that at night, as if you're out and there's bats around, you can hear those little clicks. That's them using their echolocation. So they can use that to pick insects off right in the air. So if you ever see tree swallows or barn swallows or purple martins during the day flying around picking off insects, bats are doing that same thing at night. So they usually occupy the same types of habitats as some of those animals, where you've got the tree swallows and barn swallows during the day. You'll have bats during the evening fulfilling that same kind of role of picking up insects and picking them out of the air. So there's many myths about bats, of course. One is that all bats are rabid, or bats tend to be more rabid. The truth is, bats don't have a higher instance of rabies than any other mammal. So they have a very low percentage of individuals that are rabid. It's the same throughout the mammalian kingdom, really, as far as the mammals we come in contact with. So your odds of coming in contact with a bat that has rabies are quite low. Of course, just like with any animal that you might come in contact with, if it's acting strange and if it's a nocturnal animal that's out during the day, and it seems to be acting kind of loopy, definitely want to keep your distance. With bats, you probably won't come in contact with a rabid individual. And in the spring, I should say also that it's not uncommon to see some of the more nocturnal animals out during the day, like you might see a raccoon out during the day or a skunk. When they're in breeding season or when there's young, sometimes they'll disperse during the day. So you might see some of those kind of animals out during the day this time of the year, more so than you would say in the fall. But bats, you're probably not going to see out. If you happen to see one during the day, there's probably something off. Another myth about bats is that they will get tangled in your hair. That's another myth. I've never met anybody who's gotten a bat tangled in their hair. Their echolocation is so good that they can tell that there's a big animal nearby and they don't want to run into you at all. So they will keep their distance. You might, if you ever are out where there's a lot of bats around, you might find that you can hear them or see them flying a little bit close to you. A lot of the times they're doing that because mosquitoes are attracted to us and the bats are attracted to mosquitoes. So sometimes they will come closer to humans when they're picking off insects that happen to be around us. You can find them often by lights as well. If you have street lights or any kind of bright lights that attract insects, if you're walking under street lights, you might see bats flying above as they're picking off the insects there as well. But really don't have to worry about them getting tangled in your hair. I've yet to meet anybody or hear of any instances of that happening. So bats have been really impacted by something called white nose syndrome, and it's caused an estimated 80% decline in bat species since 2006. So this has been a huge issue with bats, and their populations have really steadily decreased. And what white nose syndrome is it causes bats to stir more often. So when bats are hibernating, they at least a lot of the bats that we have, these cave bats, they tend to hibernate in large cave systems where there's a lot of them, a lot of individuals all together. So if they are infected with white nose syndrome, this causes them to wake more frequently, especially when disturbed. So you might see that cave systems are usually closed off during the times where bats are hibernating. The reason for that is if there's people inside exploring the caves, this white nose syndrome can make the bats stir. And in a big group, if one starts to stir, then a whole bunch of them will start to stir. And they can stir more easily with white nose syndrome. And when they stir or wake up when they shouldn't, that causes them to burn off the fat reserves that they've stored off for the winter. So they don't have the fat reserves that they need to get through the winter months. So in that case, they end up either starving or leaving the cave system early in search of food. But if they leave the cave system too early, and if it's too early in the spring, the insects just aren't there. So they end up, again, starving. The white nose syndrome shows up in bats as a white fungus that's seen on the face and the wings of the bats. And like I said, it's caused about an 80% decline in bat populations since 2006. So it's made a huge impact on bats. In New York, we have 9 species of bats, most of them being cave bats. So 6 are cave bats and 3 are not. 3 are tree bats. Cave bats are going to be the most common that you'll come in contact with or that you'll see flying around. And these are going to be the bats that you would get coming to your bat house if you do put up a bat house. So cave bats spend the winter hibernating in caves and in mines. In summers, you can find them in hollow trees, under bridges, inside buildings. If you happen to have a structure or a barn that has bats in it, that's going to be some of these cave bat species. They can also be found beneath loose bark. They're typically very plain and brownish in color. So they don't have a lot of color on them. They do not have hair on their tail membrane. So when I showed you the morphology before and how the bats have those long wings, they also have that tail membrane that doesn't have any hair on it. We'll see some bats that do have that. And the cave bats only have one baby per year. So that is another reason why their populations are in such big decline. They just don't have the resources to have more babies to rebound their population. So it can take a long time for them to rebound because they only have one baby per year. So that is another reason why their populations have decreased so much, is that there's just not, they're not producing enough bats to make up for those that are lost. Here are some of the species you can find here in New York. And if you're watching from other locations, especially if you're out west or further down south, you're going to find different diversity. But in New York, this is what we have. We have a bat called the northern long-eared bat. A lot of these you'll see look a lot alike because they are these cave bats that are just kind of brownish in color. They have large ears. So if you look at that cute little face, they also have giant ears. They can easily fly through dense forests. So you'll find these bats in thick forests. They will squeeze into rock crevices and in caves to hibernate. And they've been severely impacted by the white nose syndrome. The Indiana bat is an endangered species. They hibernate in large numbers in very few locations. So that is a danger for any kind of species. If something happens to one of those locations, that whole population there can be affected. So that's the case of the Indiana bat. Half of the Indiana bats in the Northeast spend the winter in just one New York mine. Summer maternity colonies range from a dozen to several hundred animals in tree crevices and under bark. And they have a pink face that distinguishes it from the little brown bat. So a lot of these bats are hard to tell one apart from the other, but the Indiana bat has this pinkish little face, which you can see there in those pictures. Little brown bat, this is the most common bat in New York. If you see a bat flying around, it's probably going to be a little brown bat. They're frequently are found in buildings in the summer, for better or for worse. They can be found in tree crevices or under bark, and they feed low over water. So if you're by a pond or any kind of water feature in the evening and you see a bat flying low over it, it's probably going to be a little brown bat. There's also the big brown bat, which we do have locally. This is going to be the largest of the New York cave bats that we have. Their body is about 3 inches long, and they have a 13-inch wingspan. So they have quite a large wingspan. So this is really going to be the largest bat you would see here in the Rochester area. They will raise its young in small groups in buildings as well as in trees. They emerge early in the evening to feed high in the treetops. So the little brown bat tends to feed low over water. The big brown bat is high above the treetops. Their face, wings, and ears are black with no fur. So they have a darker colored face, ears, and wings. Not that you tend to get close enough to see that, but if you see a large bat with large wingspan flying high above the trees, it's probably going to be a big brown bat. There's the small-footed bat, which is New York's smallest bat. Its body is less than 2 inches and its wingspan is 9 inches. It weighs less than a nickel. It has a raccoon-style mask, so it has a dark face. It'll raise its young on cliff faces, bridges, and rocks with really good sun exposure. And most of them you can find in the Adirondack region. And then this is one of the bats that's the cave bats that's not super brown. They actually have kind of a reddish fur. This is called the eastern pipistral. They prefer warm, moist caves. They rarely cluster together. They have that reddish colored fur. They'll form small colonies in the summer near open woods and water. And they're often mistaken for dead leaves hanging from a tree. So a lot of when they're hanging upside down, they can look like a leaf in the tree, and you can walk right by them and you'd have no idea that they're there. And then here's a picture of a couple eastern pipistrals. You can see in the leaves here, kind of hanging out, looks like in some possibly oak leaves, some dead leaves in the tree here, and very, very well camouflaged. So that's going to be the case with most of what are called the tree bats. And the tree bats instead of congregating in caves and in mines, they'll live all year in trees. They are more colorful than the cave bats, and they have fur on that tail membrane, and they use that to wrap around themselves like a blanket, so that helps them camouflage as well. They have 2 to 4 young per year, and all 3 tree bats that we have in the state will fly south for the winter. So here are the 3 species of tree bats we have. This is going to be the only one you could find that is really going to be found in the Rochester area. This is the red bat, and they roost low in trees. They blend in really well with the foliage. The males are reddish orange, and the females have more gray on them. They tend to roost alone, so those cave bats will roost in large numbers. The red bats, they're solitary, and the females will give birth to twins, sometimes triplets. So here's a female, and you can see the female looks a little bit more gray, and here's her twins here. So they tend to give birth to twins, to 2 babies. This is such a cute one. This is called the hoary bat. So this is going to be the largest bat we have in the state. They have a body of 3.5 inches long and a wingspan of 16 inches, so quite large. They're going to be more common in the Adirondacks. So if you spend any time out there, keep your eyes open for a bat with a large wingspan. That's going to be your hoary bat. And they will roost alone as well, high up in the treetops. So very silverish in color, very fluffy looking, and they've got kind of that tan colored face. So that is your hoary bat. And then finally, the last bat you can find here in New York is the silver-haired bat. And they have silver-tipped hairs on their body. They will roost alone under tree bark and in tree cavities. We've seen pictures of them under shutters as people go to close their shutters. Sometimes there'll be a bat under there. That could be any of these tree bats because they tend to be solitary. They'll come out before sunset to feed, and they prefer more northern habitat. So probably not going to see them here in the Rochester area, but again, in the Adirondacks and further north, you might find the silver-haired bat. As far as mating, bats primarily mate in the fall, at least our bats here in New York. And females are able to save the sperm of males in their body, and the egg doesn't get fertilized until the spring. So this is something that happens with other animals too. Like a possum will do this also. So they'll mate in the fall, and then their egg doesn't get fertilized until the spring. Gestation time is about 40 days to 6 months, depending on the species. And then there are the nursery roosts. So the females tend to congregate together and form these nursery roosts where they will raise the young. Caves and mines tend to be too cold for that here in New York. So females will gather together and roost in different areas. This would be like your bat house to give birth and to raise young. Pups are born in June to early August. So we're getting to be about that time where these bat pups will start to be born. And newborn pups have well-developed feet and are soon able to hang upside down while the female leaves the roost. So she'll leave the roost to feed and then come back to nurse the young. The mothers care for the young exclusively, and the young can't fly until they're about a month old. So you might have heard about bat houses called Bachelor Pads. They're smaller bat houses. What happens is once these females give birth, they will exclusively be the ones that take care of the pups. The males tend to go elsewhere and form smaller colonies, and those are going to be your smaller bat houses called Bachelor Pads. So they will inhabit those even through August as the females are giving birth. So there's still time to attract bats to your yard if you're trying to do so. And you can do that with bat houses. So bat houses, if you put them up, you're most likely to get the little brown bats coming to them. But depending on your area, you might get something else. They are a fabulous way of controlling insects because one bat can eat anywhere from 2,000 to 6,000 insects per night. Most of the time, they're eating lots and lots of mosquitoes. In our climate, you want to black to absorb heat because they do like it really warm. And when you paint it black, you want to use an outdoor safe water-based paint that's non-toxic and latex. In general, when you're painting things for wildlife or if you're coating them with any kind of clear coat, if anything is safe for marine use, then you're all good. So that there's really strict rules about marine use. So any kind of paint or sealant or anything like that that you're using, as long as it's marine safe for marine use, you're in the clear. So as far as mounting your bat house, you want to put it somewhere in a spot where bats won't get tangled. So up high is great, at least 15 feet up, and in a place where there's not tree branches or shrubs under it, because when the bats are leaving the house, they kind of crawl down and out and then swoop out. So if there's anything below the house that they could get tangled in, that could be a problem for the bats. Houses mounted on poles and structures tend to become occupied faster than those on trees. So if you have a pole, that's a great place to put it on. If you've got the side of a house or side of a barn, that's great too, somewhere that gets a lot of sun. If you mount it on a tree, they will use it, but they don't become occupied as quickly, and could have something to do with the sunlight. If that it causes some sun to not hit the house certain times of the day, if there's other trees around, that might have something to do with it. So if you can mount it on a pole or on a structure, that is ideal. And as far as bat houses go, more chambers equals more bats. So I'll show you a couple bat houses that I have here, but basically the bigger the bat house, the more bats you can get in it. Large houses create more temperature fluctuation as well. And bat houses can become occupied anytime in the season, besides the winter here in New York. But you could still put up a bat house now, and you might get one of those smaller colonies forming of, for example, the males that have left that nursery colony. One thing you want to check for is evidence of wasps coming and going. That can be an issue. If there are wasps that have created a little hive, a little in your bat house and attached, that little hive up there, bats aren't going to use it. So that's one thing to keep an eye out for. If you see wasps coming and going from your bat house, that's going to be a problem. And you want to make sure to mount the house facing east or south, somewhere where it gets 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. So here's a picture here of some bats in their bat house. So you can see a lot of bats will occupy a house. And then migration and hibernation. Bats tend to migrate in the fall to cave systems and mine systems as the insect numbers decline. So as soon as we start seeing those orioles leave and the hummingbirds leave, those bats are leaving too. They're heading south. They'll live off their fat reserves all winter. And some bats will stay all winter in a hibernation state. So not all animals truly hibernate, but bats do. So bats hibernate, chipmunks truly hibernate. Other mammals will go through something called torpor, where their body really slows down, but they'll wake up here and there to feed or to leave wherever they're kind of roosting for the winter. But most bats will truly hibernate, where they are going to slow down all winter long, and they won't stir again till the spring. And in April, bats begin to make their migration back. So that's when we start to see them coming back into the area. So as far as bats go, that's everything I have prepared for you guys. But I thought I'd show you a couple bat houses and the differences between them. So this is the smallest bat house we have in the store. It's kind of hard to see how small it is, but it's about birdhouse size, but it's thinner. And what makes a bat house different than, say, a birdhouse is the bats will approach it from the bottom up. So there's no hole in it for them to just fly right into. They will use their echolocation a lot of the times to figure out that there is that there's some kind of empty cavity, and that's what you'll see that some bat houses have a little blank spot in the middle of it. Not only does that help with the bat's echolocation to discover that there is some kind of hollow crevice for them to stay in and to roost in, but it also helps with temperature fluctuation. So it's like an air vent to keep it cooler down in the bottom and keep it warmer up top. So this is the smallest bat house that we have in the store, but this will hold even a dozen bats. So even something this small will hold a dozen bats, and it's one chamber. Some of them will have multiple chambers, but you can see in there that it is just. And the bats will just crawl right on in there. They'll latch onto the top, and others will latch onto the mesh here that allows for their feet to latch on. So this would be most likely you're not going to get a nursery colony in here because it doesn't hold enough bats. But this is where you would get some of those smaller colonies as they leave later on in the season. Now, if you wanted to get something like a nursery colony or have a better chance of that, you could put up a bigger house. So we've got houses in all different sizes, but I thought I'd show you these two kind of different ones. This one's significantly larger. This is called the Sunshine's Bat House. And again, it has the little vents in the side there for the temperature fluctuation and for the bats to discover that, oh, there's some kind of a hollow cavity there that I can roost in. It does have a couple chambers. It looks like it has 2 chambers. And then the bats will climb up on the inside in order to go in. And this will hold about 200 bats. So the other one I just showed was a dozen. This can hold a couple hundred. So if you're really looking to get a lot of bats, something larger like this would be good. So we've got some houses that will hold anywhere from about a dozen bats to about 300. So we've got a whole bunch of different types. So if you're looking to attract bats, you still have time. We do have an article here from the Upstate Gardener's Journal. You can always access online called The Amazing Bat, or we have it here for you to take a copy. We do have books about bats as well if you are interested in learning more. You can always get the Stokes Beginner's Guide to Bats. That's a good one. Shows some different species. And then also this newer book called Bat Basics. This has more information about attracting bats and some question and answers from some bat scientists. And it does have some species profiles as well. So this will show you some of the different types of bats that are in the U.S. and how you can attract them. And it has some more information about bats as well. So if you have any questions, put those in the comments. Looks like Rhonda is on watching from Canandaigua. Good morning, Rhonda. Miguel is on from Holly Ridge, North Carolina. All right. So we've got people from near and far. Bonnie says, had a bat in the house last year. Hopefully never again. Yeah. So it's always great to attract bats, but you don't really want them in your house. Some of the best things you can do if you do get a bat in the house, if you can, to sequester it to one room and open up all the windows. And again, they'll use that echolocation to hopefully fly out. If you have them roosting somewhere where you don't want them, say they're in an attic, the best thing you can do is have somebody come at night to seal off the spot where they're coming in. And in the meantime, put up a bat house nearby where they can occupy that so they have somewhere to go when it gets to the morning hours. If you seal off the spot where they're coming and going from during the day, they will have nowhere to go and you'll just have them flying around your attic or structure like crazy, which you probably don't want either. Let's see. Rhonda says, when I moved to Canandaigua in 2009, the night sky was full of bats. After a few years later, I hardly ever saw one. They are just making a comeback. Thanks for explaining the decline. Is there anything I can do to help them? So one thing you can absolutely do, of course, is the bat house. Probably the best thing you can do is not use any kind of sprays or insecticides because they need that insect protein. Insect levels in general worldwide are declining at a rapid clip as well, which is quite scary because birds rely on them for their source of food, as do a lot of animals that are out during the night, like bats. So absolutely stay away from any kind of sprays or insecticides, because when you think about it, if a bat scoops up a little insect that has died from an insecticide, they're ingesting that too, and that can build up in their body and cause them to die as well. So absolutely you want to stay away from that. Ed says, great show. Thanks for all the good information. We see the little and big brown bats in our neighborhood. Also seeing some lightning bugs lately. All right. Orioles stopped by yesterday. Okay, so that's great. I love the lightning bugs. They are so, so cool. We should talk about lightning bugs too, because they're really, really interesting. Their larvae also glow. You can see them in the grass sometimes, which is fun. And Orioles, it's good to hear that you're still getting Orioles. We've got some people are still getting them. Some people are seeing a little bit less of Oriole activity in their yards and at their feeders. Now's the time you want to start incorporating some mealworms out there for them to encourage them to keep on coming. That can really help. So So the Orioles are kind of hit or miss at the moment, but they should come back, especially if you keep those mealworms out. They'll start grabbing beakfuls of those to bring to their young. And then ultimately they tend to bring the young, once they've fledged, back to your feeders to eat some jelly. Jim says, hi, James from Michigan. Hi, are your houses easy to attach to a pole? Yeah, they're pretty easy depending on which kind you get. Most of them have some kind of way to screw them into either a 4x4, or if you get something like a purple martin pole, an adjustable pole, those tend to be about 15 feet long. You can attach them to the back of that pole using some brackets. So yeah, you can attach them depending on what kind of pole you want to use. You can attach them fairly easily. If you can attach them to a telescoping pole, that helps a little bit. Because then you can raise and lower it. So say if you do have something like wasps getting into the house, you can lower that house down to clear it out, get the wasps out of there, and raise it back up. So fairly easy to attach to a pole, very easy to attach to a structure using just this little piece of hardware here you can screw into it. And then most of them have a hole in the bottom too that you can put a screw through to kind of attach it and secure it there on the a structure. So yes, fairly easy to attach to a pole, thankfully. So if anybody has any more questions, we will be back on Saturday where we will show we'll give you an update on what kind of things have been in the area. We'll show off your photos that you guys have sent in. And then next week, we're talking about bird food and the different types of bird food and what makes one better than the other. And we will be back talking about that next Tuesday. So Saturday, we'll give an update, another local bird and butterfly and what have you update. And then Tuesday, we're talking food. And speaking of food, Vicky's got a question here saying, how long do mealworms survive in the fridge? So usually they'll last about 3 weeks or so is a pretty safe bet. So they last a pretty long time. They might even last a little bit longer, but I would say 3 weeks is about the max that they'll last. So it looks like that's everybody's comments and questions for the day. Thank you guys for watching. We'll be back on Saturday with another broadcast. And until then, enjoy your birds and your bugs and your bats, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.